Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to wait a few more minutes and let a few more people join, and then we will go ahead and get started. Just to let everyone know, this meeting is being recorded and should be available for anyone to view within the next couple of weeks. It does have to go through a compliance process. Once again, we're going to give maybe like one more minute for people to join, and then we will go ahead and get started. Alrighty, Brent, if you want to go ahead.
Sure will. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm an Infinitas financial advisor, and we're pleased that you're all here to join us for a program on your money story. I don't know how many times you've thought, either for yourself or for someone you know well, wondering how or why they made a certain money decision. Well, if that affects you, and if you've been in that position, we've brought an expert to you that'll provide some information by the name of Ryan Sullivan. Ryan is a managing director with Hartford Funds. He leads our communication workshops around the country and speaks on a variety of financial topics with a focus on retirement research from the MIT Age Lab. To date, he has provided insights to audiences in 46 states and Puerto Rico, as well as led hundreds of webinars. Ryan is passionate about helping others improve their communication, volunteering with college students, people experiencing homelessness, and those living with Alzheimer's and dementia. He serves on Hartford Funds Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Council, as well as on the NICSA Diversity Projects Outreach Committee. Please join me in welcoming Ryan. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brent. Thank you to Infinitas, and thank you all for joining. I hope you're doing well and excited to share, as Brent said, some insights, things that can help as we think about financial decisions that we make, why we do that, looking at our past decisions, and to the degree we want to change things, make better decisions in the future, this research can help. So I'm going to share my screen. If Kimberly, you can allow me to do that. Just take
On
a
it.
moment, folks.
Did you get it?
There we are. Thank you.
Awesome.
All right, so hopefully you all can see that okay. So this idea of your money story that I'll explain, this idea of a money story, a money script, the things when we go to make financial decisions that play in our head, that affect how we make those decisions and how we interact with others relative to finances, whether in a relationship, a significant other, our kids, our parents. As you'll see, this all intertwines, and we'll explain more about that. So this idea of a money story, it comes from Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, who's a wealth psychology expert. If you have an interest, she has multiple books, a podcast. So we worked with her on creating this content. But before we get into Kathleen's insights, I want to share a quote that I think might strike you as a little odd, but maybe useful. So this idea that the longest running relationship in our life is our relationship with money. And you think about that for a moment, the reason it's laid out that way is whomever raised us, that perhaps they gave some thought to finances and our life even before we were born. People thinking about just affording cribs and what to do around the house, maybe starting to think about if it's savings for education. So thinking about us and money before we're born, we certainly have our own decisions and interactions relative to finances during our lifetime. And then we may leave money to others. So things that continue even past our life. And so you think about that, that's longer than the number of years that we live. So important that we give some thought while we can to what we want that legacy to be, even in the stories that we teach and tell about money. Now, I'm going to bring up some questions here. Love to get your thoughts. You don't have to unmute. Just think about as I bring up this next set of questions, which of these statements do you identify with most? Maybe you might think of a couple of these to some degree, but if you had to pick one, as you look through that list, which one do you think most identifies who you are, how you think and act about money? And as you're looking through that, the reason we ask this, that later on we'll get to how it is that you may have learned to be this way or to have that thought. Maybe something you learned from a friend or family member. According to Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, often we learn these stories, these scripts between our ages of 5 and 15. The people that we interact with, if it's family members, friends, things that we hear, even that we don't notice necessarily in the moment, but that start to affect our views about money. You think about your friends and family, if you had to look through this list and pick which one might be most applicable for them, you get a sense that we do have different thoughts and feelings about money. So we'll get more into where that comes from. So our agenda for our short time together, we'll talk a little bit about what a money story is, how to discover your own money story, and then ways that if you want to make changes, if you find that any of those current money stories aren't working well for you, how to make changes with that. So what is a money story? Well, as we get into that, it's helpful to think first about emotions and finances. So we'll talk about some myths about money. The first myth, that financial decisions that we make are rational. I can't speak for you all. Not every decision I make relative to finances, how I spend, how I save, how I gift to others, how I donate to causes I believe in, not all of those things are rational. Maybe I'd be in a financially somewhat better place if that were to be how things worked, but just not how we as human beings typically make financial decisions. So yes, there's hopefully some rational aspect, but in many cases also an emotional aspect. But that's not to say, as we get to the second myth, that having emotions about money or about financial decisions, that that's necessarily a bad thing. That if we're going to make a financial decision, but we feel very uneasy about that, those feelings may be helpful in having us give some more thought, reconsider, is that something we really want to do? So emotions provide data, input, insights that if we feel particularly good about something or bad, all things that help better understand why we've made that decision. The last one, when it comes to money, investments, a myth that men are better than women at investing or relative to finances or making financial decisions. And just not the case. Studies have shown that it really depends more on the person than their gender. Women in some studies proven to be a better investor long term because sometimes men are more apt to chase after securities that if they're doing well at a particular moment versus thinking about the long term. So again, all things that would indicate that gender alone isn't the big driver for why we save or invest a particular way. So your money story, what's different about that? And what does that entail? Again, you think about those earlier years, especially as Kathleen Burns Kingsbury ages 5 to 15, although we're constantly getting new input, hearing from others, seeing things happen that impact our financial decisions. And so if there were individual chapters in a book on things like saving, investing, budgeting, donating to charities, gifting to others, or leaving a legacy, that in each of those chapters, there would be some scripts, some things that we've heard, that we've experienced, that wind up making our story. And so that can be, if it's how family members or friends earlier in life, how they talked about money. Maybe they never talked about money. Perhaps we have people in our life who their thinking is spend it while you got it. Other people we've interacted with who might, to a large degree, say that a penny saved is a dollar earned. And all things that as we hear these things and choose which we want to emulate, have others that maybe we rebel against, all of that helps drive and dictate what our money story is. The challenge that, according to Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, that these things are now pretty well ingrained as we get older. We've got these money scripts. We said that we always have at least some emotion, very often about finances, that these things play together such that in a given moment, we can make financial decisions without realizing all these things are happening in the background, maybe for better, perhaps for worse. But when you look at the other things that go into creating our money story, that things like culture and race have some impact. In some cultures, money is more talked about, meant to be displayed. Other cultures, exactly the opposite. As we said, gender has some input or impact on that, but not overly so. Things like generations, that people who are older feel differently about money, especially now they've had more experience with it than perhaps younger people do. Religion can have an impact. Some religions have particular mindsets relative to having wealth, donating it, how we display that to others. And then things like social class. So how we grew up, whether we were more middle income or lower income, or where we are now, where we aspire to be. All of those things play into it. And the last one, what they call money events. So perhaps in having a family member, or it might happen to ourselves, that we make money, we buy a lottery ticket, we have an investment that does particularly well, we get a big job promotion and raise, we inherit money, Or on the other end, we have a financial hardship where someone we care about has a health incident that costs an excessive amount of money, that people in our lives have a business that fails, or that someone goes bankrupt. You get ourselves or someone we care about, all of those things play into how we think about money. So let's start getting into how it is you create your money story. That why it's important, according to Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, that if we can understand how we came to have these stories, that can help us better understand why and how we make decisions today. And with that, we now, if we're more aware and intentional, can make better decisions going forward. Anything that we want to change to relative our money story, or what we're teaching to other family members or friends, if you have kids or grandkids. So one of the key elements about understanding your personal money story is looking at what's called a money genogram. So this is kind of like a family tree, but for finances. So this is just one sample genogram. As you look at that, if you want to zoom in on any of this, at the top of your screen, if you hover your mouse, you'll see a button for view options. You can zoom in a bit. Some of that font is a little bit small, but this is for one particular person, their family tree. And with that, looking at for each of the people in that family, that we're going to talk about what their money stories might be. What did we learn from that person? Was it something that we heard them say? Or if we were going to encapsulate how they acted about money, how would we do that in a sentence or two? Now, your personal genogram might look very different. Myself, many others, there might be step parents, grandparents, so that the tree might be a whole lot wider. And with that, even more input, more things that we've heard or learned that can impact our money story. But I'll show you an example of how you can fill this out, that we will send out to you afterwards, a piece that allows you to fill out your own money genogram. But this is a actual client of Kathleen Burns Kingsbury. And I'll just quickly explain the situation, show you how this particular woman's genogram looked, and then we'll talk a little bit about how it is ours may differ, how to fill that out, and then how to use that to make better decisions. So here's Gwen. Of course, the name and image have been changed to protect her privacy, but a woman who's divorced, an attorney. And with that, the one issue she came in to talk to Kathleen Burns Kingsbury about, that she wasn't saving as much as she'd like for her kids and felt a bit guilty about that. And so Kathleen walked her through this process of creating a money genogram. Now, again, this is for Gwen's family, how the tree looks. Ours may look very different, but as you look at the paternal grandparents, you'll see some names, some statements. Again, if you want to zoom in on those using that button at the top of the screen. So I won't go through this in detail. The focus here isn't on Gwen, but you'll see some statements, either things that Gwen remembered her grandparents saying, or in how they acted about money, how they exemplified that, Gwen's summation. So, on one side, we might have people in our lives who have said or acted in a way that says, I'm not made of money. Other people in our lives, as you look at some of the other people in Gwen's story here, that this whole idea of work hard, play hard, spend it while you got it. So we have people who, for whatever reason, the stories they have currently, maybe that they learn to spend money at least as quickly as they make it. Other people who have done a very good job of saving, but they're always so afraid of running out of money, they can't enjoy it. There's actually a term for it, poor mental wealth. Poor mental wealth. People who they're so conservative about spending that they don't enjoy that. They don't, if it's donate to causes they believe in, they feel like they need to hang on to every dollar of that. All things that we may have learned earlier in life. So how does this play out? Now, again, this tree goes to Gwen and her situation where she was upset, feeling guilty that she wasn't investing enough money for the kids. When they looked at the budgeting that she was doing, found that there wasn't a lot of extra money when all the expenses for the kids were added up. But here's where looking at your money story and your feelings about money ties into the tools that you have available through your retirement plan, things like budgeting, that once we better understand how we feel about things, how we got to these stories, that if we have the ability to budget a bit differently, to save a bit more, to think a bit more longer term about our goals, or to help those that we care about. That was the case here, that Gwen, in better understanding her feelings about money, tied that into the decisions she was making, was able to change some of those money scripts going forward. And we do have scripts, as I mentioned, relative to how we spend, that any time that we are in a store or online, how quickly we click that button to buy. Is it something that we do almost impulsively, or is it something where we give a lot of thought, sometimes maybe almost too much thought? If it's a small dollar amount, if it's something that we need, all things, if we get to why we make the decisions that we do. Same with savings, investing, donating to others, whether to a faith-based organization or other community group, or gifting it to friends, family, or what we want to leave to others. So thinking about that genogram, if you have kids or grandkids, if they were filling out their genogram, what might they say about you? Either words that you've said or things that they see in action that show how you feel about money, and ultimately that impacts their money story. So this idea of creating your genogram, if it is that your family situation doesn't clearly fit into these basic circles and boxes, again, as mine doesn't, that you can always just fill out something like this on a piece of paper, just freehand write that out. But the more that you can think about the different players, the folks, the family members, some people, if they spent a lot of time, especially in life with family friends, you can include those if they have helped influence how you think about money. And with that, the same worksheet helps you to lay out some scripts when someone, if they were to say to you, what do you think about saving? When you just think about that concept, what are the first few words or phrases that come up? The more that you can jot this down quickly without overthinking it, you might be surprised, as I was, as many people who have gone through this process have been, in, wow, I didn't realize I thought that way. And then to be able to reflect and say, where did I learn that? How did I get to that point? Was I something that I learned from friends or family, or something that someone in my life did and I was trying to do the opposite, right? That can also influence us. So the encouragement with this, that if we want to change our money stories, once we've gone through that process, putting together the money genogram, taking some time with that might bring up some memories for some folks, trying to think through, if you're not sure, that you perhaps you have a grandparent, a great grandparent who you only remember vaguely. Some folks will ask other family members, hey, do you remember our great grandparent? They used to say something about money. What was that? So kind of neat. We've had folks who have opened up that conversation to other family members and learned a lot through that process. But once we do that and then lay out the money scripts that seem most prevalent, that kind of jump out from going through that process relative to saving, investing, donating, that then we can decide which of those, if any, that we want to change. Now, Here's one example, obviously a habit that someone might want to change. But if you've ever made any changes in life relative to smoking, diet, saving, anything else, often it's not easy. That it might take multiple attempts to make changes, but the more that we're aware of the situation that we're in, we're intentional about where it is that we want to go, more probable, according to Kathleen, that we'll work to it if we follow the following steps. And so for one, just going through the process, figuring out those money scripts. If we find that there's one that isn't serving us very well, just picking one to start. Like anything else in life, if we pick 5 different things we want to change, very difficult to do that. But picking one, the one perhaps we think has the biggest impact that we can make changes with. So figuring that one, but thinking about how it is that it's negatively impacting us. According to Kathleen, that if we can give some additional thought, really think about why that script isn't serving us. What decisions did that help impact in the past that didn't play out the way that we want? The more we can spend a little time on that, the more likely that we'll want to and be able to make changes with it. Then from there, thinking about a new script. What is it that we want to say to ourselves and express to others, to our kids, our grandkids, friends, and family? What new script do we want to be in place? And then, like anything else, if we can give some thought to how the positive impacts would help our lives and help others. So we think about the negative one, the one we want to get rid of. What are the negative consequences of that? What's a more positive script? And how can we reinforce that? What would be the positive things that were to happen if we were to stick with that for a while? And then ultimately, it's going to take practice, right? Just like a diet or anything else, that we may have slips from time to time. We fall back into an old way of thinking or acting. But over time, if we stick with it, that truly can help to change that story going forward. So the last part about changing that money story, that's also in the piece that will be sent to you afterwards. So the encouragement to take some time to go through this. And I'll tell you firsthand, having done it myself, that it does take some time, take some practice, but there are things that I've changed in the time that we've been working with this research from Kathleen Burns Kingsbury that have been a help. And for me, realizing, looking back at my family genogram, that I've gotten permission from family members to talk about it, but having a dad that earlier in life, very important to him that people saw him driving new cars, wearing a suit. He was a professional person and very much wanted that to be obvious to other people. And over time found that financially that wasn't the best decision for him, and so made changes, retooled things. And so to me, learning from him that that old way of being didn't serve him, arguably may not serve me. Another family member who, one of these people who spent it as quickly as he made it and wound up in debt and unfortunately had a bankruptcy. Again, gotten his permission to share that, but very much I realize that that drives my financial decisions, trying to make sure I don't wind up in a similar situation, although that can happen to anyone. If we lose a job, medical expenses, but seeing things happen and then learning from it, but also understanding what those things were. What happened? How did we feel about it? And how has it affected our decisions? So I know that's a lot of information, but to me, worth spending the time. And then once you have those new scripts, to practice and to consider sharing. So for me, now that I've gone through the process, sharing this with family members, and a few of them now have had the interest where they want to go through the process for themselves as well. And we've kind of had some fun working through that. That, certainly if you're working with a financial professional, sharing the stories there, and thinking about what story that you're teaching to your kids, to your grandkids. Some folks, if they have kids or grandkids that are old enough, including them in the conversation as well. So a quick recap. We talked a little bit about what a money story is, how to discover your own. Like anything else worthwhile, it does take some effort, some time, some practice. But if we put that time in, the ability to understand, to be more aware and intentional about those stories and about what we're sharing and teaching to others, all of that is worthwhile. As Kathleen Burns Kingsbury here in wrapping up, she talks about this idea of discovering your unique money story, and all of ours are. Appreciating its power is an important step to making peace with our money. I think for all of us, if we've ever had sleepless nights where we've wondered if we'd made the right financial decisions, making peace with our money, to me, it seems like a very worthwhile goal, ultimately improving our financial health. So that piece will be sent out. Encourage you to give some thought, put some time in with that. You might find it as fun and helpful as I did. But let's pause here and see, Kimberly, if we want to open it up, see if folks have any questions.
Yeah, so at this point, if you guys would like to unmute, you are welcome to ask some questions. Ryan, I just wanted to start us off with one. So I guess in my maybe personal experience or things that I've heard from other people, when there's family history involved, people tend to either, just as an example, maybe see what their parents are doing and then replicate that, or see what their parents are doing and like kind of go in the exact opposite direction. You know, I feel like we learn from our family members what to do and then what not to do. And sometimes even to a fault. So I was just curious to know if you've had any experiences or heard of anybody where maybe they kind of went in the exact opposite direction, in maybe not a healthy way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And thanks for asking that. So, and this is something that Kathleen Burns Kingsbury talks about, that we all, in the interactions we've had with friends, with family members, there might be things that stand out as being particularly good or bad. But in that situation, Kimberly, that you laid out where something was negative, we decide to rebel against that, do the exact opposite. Sometimes that's to our detriment, that it's very improbable that everything people did relative to money was all bad, was all negative. If there was one thing or one type of thing that they did that was negative that we don't want to emulate, we want to change that, great. But if we look, we might find there's other things that they did that actually worked well. So, someone who maybe spent too much relative to their budget, and that might not be something we want to emulate, but that same person, if they were very generous with friends and family, we know that that can be done to a fault like anything else. But, if they were helpful in supporting a particular cause that they cared about. So sometimes if we look at these stories, as much as we say, think about that one line, that one thing that happened, especially with our closest family members, maybe even take a little more time and find, what, there are some things that didn't work, and I want to make sure I don't fall into those same traps. But if there's a couple of things that we look and say, what, I do want to emulate that. That's actually a helpful thing. I think, Kimberly, to your point, it's not an all or nothing. So giving a little more thought to that can be helpful.
Thanks. Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask while we've got Ryan on here? Okay, so I have recorded this call. We will be distributing the worksheet that Ryan was talking about immediately after this call. And then this recording does need to go through a compliance process, so it will be made available for those of you guys who hopped on late or just want to review the information. It will be available here in just a couple of weeks, so I will make sure to let everybody know about that. So Ryan, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to everyone who joined the call.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Infinitas, and hope everyone takes care.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ryan.
Thanks, Brian.